Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and I figured we would go through a few more things on React. So let's open up the same React project I had in the previous one. Oh, this is my PHP thing, so let me get out of that. Let's open the React one. React. Okay, let's wait for that to open. Oh, that is it. Okay. Cool. Now here we go. So basically we had app.js. I think, nope, that's the template one. This is the one. Okay. So last we left off, again, the HTML doesn't change. We had two components at the end. We had app, counter, and at the end counter was a functional component and app was still a class component. I'm going to keep it that way so I can show you again the way you do it in a class component versus the way you do it in a functional component. Now what's going to happen is that sometimes you need to make API calls. Okay, so we're going to practice making an API call. Now usually you want that API call. So let's say like you have a component that renders like a list of users. You're going to want to grab that user data the minute the component renders onto the screen. So most people's impulse would be to put it in the constructor. Okay, the problem is scoping. Okay, that information, once you pull the API data, will kind of disappear. There's also some other issues with just making API calls in the constructor. It just doesn't. The constructor runs before some of the things you need to happen exist. It just doesn't work. Okay. So what happened is that React has what's called a lifecycle function in their class components. These are functions that automatically run during certain times. Like, so basically, this first one, the only one we're going to talk about today is component did mount. There's a whole bunch of them, like get derived props and on component dismount and whatnot. But what the idea is that they run at particular times, so that way you can do things like API calls or get rid of like event listeners or things like that. So the first one is called component did mount. So all you do is you just make this function, component did mount, and then anything you put in this function happens when the component is first added to the DOM. Okay, I'll just pause it while the sirens go by. Cool. So component did mount. So let's say we just to kind of show it, we're going to console.log hello. So basically once this component mounts, it'll just automatically console log hello. Okay, so we have to spin up a server. So we need to run light server. So light server, serve my website. Give it a second to start up. And actually, nope, I did it from the wrong place. CD practice 1. Now let's run light server. And that should pop up in just a second. Okay, that's where we left off at. Control Shift I. Let's open up the inspector. Okay, and there we see the console log of hello. Neat. Okay, so it works. It does what I tell it to do right away. Now, what if I want to do the same thing in a function component? This whole component did mount function does not exist in a function component. So they had to come up with a different way to do it. Again, this is the reason why people only use class components for the longest time. Because if you wanted lifecycle functions or you wanted state, you had to use a class component. Function components were stateless for the longest time. But kind of like they had a hook to use state, they have a hook to use life effects. Except what it's referred to as a use effect. The reason is because what you're doing with component did mount is you're creating side effects. A side effect is when a function runs and it does things, it changes data, but it never returns any data. So technically any sort of consequence of the function is a side effect of it running, not the result of it running. Okay? So again, component did mount is not going to return anything. But what you would do is you would make an API call, store the data in your state, and that would be kind of what you do. Okay? So what they did to do the same thing is they created a function called useEffect. So you would do react.useEffect. And this effect what you can do in this function is pass a function, pass a callback, and that callback does all the things. So first let's just create a callback. And anything I just put in here, so if I just do console.log, happens when the component first runs, okay? Now, if I leave it like this, this is just, not only is it going to console log hello once, it's going to keep console, actually we'll say goodbye so that we can tell when it's, which component it is. Not only will it say goodbye once, but it'll say goodbye every time it updates. And sometimes it's updating when without you even thinking about it. So let's actually see that in action. So that's redoing. Okay, so see, it said goodbye once, but now I'm going to click me, which is going to change the state, cause the component to re-render, which should cause it to say goodbye again. See, goodbye 2, goodbye 3, goodbye 4, goodbye 5, goodbye 6, goodbye 7, goodbye 8, goodbye 9. But wait, component did mount only ran once when the component mounted. How do I do that? How do I make that happen? Well, what happens here is there's a second argument, okay? And you put in an empty array. Now, basically the idea is that the array is sort of any variable that it should keep an eye on. So any variable inside your component that it should keep an eye on, that if that variable changes, then you rerun this. But since I didn't put anything in there, it's not going to watch anything, so it'll never re-render beyond the first time I did it. So now if I save it, now if I click me, see, goodbye doesn't go up anymore. It's just that one time. Okay, now if I did want it to go up, what I could do is I could say state. Every time state changes, do it again. So now, if I do it, every time I do this and it changes state, goodbye should run again. So then you're seeing the goodbye count up again. Cool. But again, I only wanted to happen once, so I do that. And let's say I want something to happen at the end, like when the component gets removed, then you would just do a return. So you return, and then you do a function on return. And this function would only happen when the component gets removed. So if you were to remove it from the DOM. Okay, so that's essentially how that works. So see, it's all built into one thing now. Okay, well, in class components, if you wanted to do something when the component left, like I just show you in the docs. So, okay, so we were just talking about component did mount. That's when the component first happens. Okay, component did update. It's every time the component updates. And then the component will amount is when the component will leave. Again, there's other ones for special situations, but you can read the documentation. Most of those are really niche situations you'd use them in. Cool. So that's lifecycle functions. Okay, and that's where you would do your API calls. So if I needed that like array of users to get from my database, I would make the call and either component did mount inside a class component, or I'd use useEffect in a function component. I would call my API, I would get that database or get that list of users and then store it in my state, and then use like set state to change the state. Okay, and then that would cause a re-render of my component, and then basically I would have a thing here. And basically this would kind of take the information from that and run with it. Cool. So those are the main features when it comes to just sort of the basics of React. There's a bunch of other really cool features, such as more hooks and things like refs and contexts. But first you really want to get comfortable with all this. Okay, once you get comfortable with this, then there's a whole lot. But let's just show you a couple of neat tricks far as how to do cool stuff with this. Okie dokie. Like you can actually create a function that returns JSX. So let's say I created a function in this function component. Let's just say more stuff, const more stuff. Okay, const more stuff is equals a function, and this function returns some JSX, and this function is going to return, we'll just say another h1. Okay, hey, I'm here. So when that function runs, it'll return that h1. Now the thing is, I want my h1, I want that h1 to appear, but not all the time. Okay, I want it to basically if, so we can actually do something like this, like if, put it right down here, and then we do a ternary operator, so we can say state.count is greater than 5. If it's true, then you're going to use that function, more stuff, which that function will then return the JSX, and that will render to the screen. Otherwise, just leave it null. Okay? So now I can have a section of my component that's conditional. Save. So again, basically, when the count is above 5, then this function will run. If not, it's just null. So let's go back to our example here. So it just says click me. I click it. Nothing. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now when I click it the 6th time, something should appear. Hey, I'm here. Okay. So you can do a lot of really cool sort of conditional rendering stuff. And you could just actually put all the JSX here and just sit here and put a piece of JSX here in the ternary. But see, this is a little bit more succinct looking. It doesn't make it look too sloppy. So I have, you know, if there's other stuff I need to do, I can just do it in the function and then have the function return what I need there. So that's neat. Okay, but ternary operators are your best friend, because sometimes you may have variables that are going to be in your state, but they may not be in your state right away. And basically, if your JSX renders before that information is available, it'll look kind of weird. You'll see like undefined, or the code will error. So what you may want to do is use ternary operators to conditionally render stuff that's based on asynchronous information. So that way it doesn't actually show up till the information actually gets there. Okay, so that's really, really cool. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's any other sort of low-hanging fruit. We talked about passing stuff as props. You can pass functions as props. You can, again, there's things like the context and then the use reducer hook, but that's really advanced stuff until you get comfortable with this core stuff. And I do have videos on those hooks, so you can look at my videos on React hooks. It's in my React playlist. But this should give you a pretty good span to pretty much make probably the most of what you're going to make. Again, it's just a matter of just creating your components, again, breaking down your UI, and again, your components can be inside components, So what you could do is that so if I take a look at my component here, my counter component, the only one that really needs the number, the only stuff that depends on the number is this and this. Okay, well, the way I have it, kind of really all of this needs it. So, but the idea is that, let's say only this change numbers, what I could do is maybe move this down into another component that's just the number and leave all this logic here. Again, so the idea is that less is re-rendering. The idea is you always want to push the state far down as possible and break everything into as many pieces as possible, so that way the re-rendering, the rebuilding of your DOM is minimal as possible. Okay? Cool. And just to kind of see, you can actually see a change in here. So if I go to div root, there's a div. Okay, and then we see the h1 with the number. If I keep clicking this me, see, you're seeing the re-rendering happen. But see, it's only there. Now if I had it in the app component, this whole thing would just flash blue, which means it's doing a lot more work. It's rebuilding all of this. We don't want to do that. So yeah, that's some more React. I'll see you guys later. Have a good day. Enjoy, and check out my website over there at alexmercedcoder.com. You can find lots of cool stuff here. Now, if you want to find even more lessons and topics you can learn, head over here to devnursery.com. This front page is actually made in React, technically React TypeScript. But if you go here, to free learning, I have playlists of videos you can use to learn anything you want. I've been busy teaching stuff because it's what I do. And if you really want to learn something cool, you can learn my framework by going right over here to Merced UI. That's my framework for building UIs, which borrows a lot of ideas from React because I like the way React works. So check that out.